broad terminology which includes everything: antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral, and antiparasitic even. Whereas when we talk of antibacterials is what we are concerned about in this lecture. The rest will be covered when you read virus or parasites or fungus and so on. Now, if you remember this diagram I had shown to you in initial class also when we were talking about the bacterial structure, and if you see this, you will realize that there is a cell membrane which can be inhibited, there is a cell wall which can be inhibited by the various antimicrobials, or there can be DNA synthesis can be inhibited and protein synthesis can be inhibited. So any of the places the antimicrobial agent can work and can destroy the bacteria. So what happens here is that the cell wall inhibitors are the ones which we always prefer. Why do we prefer cell wall inhibitors? Anybody in the question panel? Why do we prefer cell wall inhibitors? Cell wall inhibitors are the so-called non-toxic antibiotics. Why? Hurry up, somebody put in. These are the antibiotics which are so-called safest, least toxic to man and are toxic only to. Yes, Abhilasha has answered correctly because we don't have cell walls. So animal cells are not having cell walls, and the antibiotic that we use will have a, what you call it, a selective site to bind and act. So where can it bind? It can bind to certain receptors. And we will again come to that wonderful cell wall structure which we were talking about in the previous classes and find out what these penicillin binding proteins are. Because remember the cell wall where we were discussing about the peptidation and cross linkages, then it can also inactivate certain autolytic enzymes, and the selective toxicity is due to the absence of the cell wall in man. So remember this peptidoglycan cell wall where you had N-acetylmuramic acid and N-acetylglucosamine, and then you had these peptide linkages which were together connected with a pentaglycine bridges. So the penicillin binding proteins are the transpeptidation enzyme which bring about this cross linkages, and that is where the beta lactam agent is going to bind. And once you have the agent which is binding here, you will realize that it has a specific site to bind. Groove ban raha hai na ye? So it is, this is the peptidoglycan cell wall, this is the pentaglycine bridges which are attached to it, and this is with the cell wall which is synthesized. This we are already familiar with. So the most crucial step is to bind these two. And it is here which works as a penicillin binding protein. It is this site which actually traps the group of antibiotics which are called as the beta lactam. If you see here, it's got a little squarish structure, and this is the structure which is an exact replica is that antibiotic. So the antibiotic will fit in here in an exact replica and will give you a inhibition of reaction. So that's where the drug is going to find. The other cell wall active agents are the glycopeptides. This is the second group. First group was beta lactam, which will bind to the penicillin binding proteins. The second is a glycopeptide, which inhibits peptidoglycan synthesis, but it doesn't attach there. It attaches somewhere different. Where does it attach? It attaches itself to the amino acids, the last amino acids which are there in the cell wall, and it doesn't allow the new unit to attach. So again, there is this glycopeptide which binds and will not allow this cross linkages to occur. So this is another way of cell wall active agents to act. Then there are certain drugs which are cell membrane inhibitors. Why are they cell membrane inhibitors? These cell membrane inhibitors are those which disrupt the cell membrane, and so the ions and macromolecules escape. Most of the antifungals act like this, and even the antibiotics like polybixin and colistin work like this. Now the problem here is that they will be very toxic drugs. So, and it will be a challenge for the body to remove these drugs from our body because the cell membranes are same whether you are talking about the bacteria or humans. The structure of the cell membrane will remain same. Then there are certain drugs which can inhibit protein synthesis. Now, this protein synthesis can be inhibited at the junction of transcription or it can be inhibited at the junction of translation. So, the inhibition of transcription is when there is an inactivation of the DNA dependent RNA polymerase, or translation is when it binds to either the 30S or the 50S subunit and will affect the initiation, elongation, or termination of peptide chain, causing inhibition of protein synthesis. So, this is what happens when it binds to the 30S and the 50S. If you remember this diagram we had seen last time also, this is just to show you which are the antibiotics which are basically protein synthesis inhibitors. One of them is chloramphenicol, which binds to the 50S portion and inhibits this peptide bond. Then an erythromycin, which binds to the 50S and prevents this translocation of ribosome. Then tetracycline, which actually interferes with the attachment of tRNA, the transfer RNA with the mRNA ribosomal complex, so that this portion will not happen. Or streptomycin, often used for tuberculosis, where it binds to the 30S protein and causes the code to be read erroneously, so that this and this do not match. So this is how it works when we're talking about. Then there are a few like the quinolones, the ciprofloxacin, norfloxacin, nalidixic acid, which basically block the DNA gyrase. Remember last time I told you that there is an enzyme called DNA gyrase which keeps the whole DNA coiled inside the small cell. So it causes uncoiling of the DNA and leads to cell death. Then it binds to the DNA dependent RNA polymerase, inhibiting the cell growth that happens in rifampicin. And it could be an analog of sulfonamides, which can happen when there are, you must be, from a biochemist, you must be familiar with this PABA. So they are an analog of PABA and it binds there, and that's why it does. So this is how it happens. The DNA gyrase and the 2-poisomerase enzymes, I told you, keep the DNA coiled. So inhibition of either one or both allows this DNA to uncoil, and therefore it is lost. So now in the gram negative, it is the inhibition of DNA gyrase, whereas in gram positive enzymes, it is bacteria, it is the enzyme 2-poisomerase, which is inhibited by quinolone. Now this is the PABA analog, where para-aminobenzoic acid combines with pteridine in presence of pteridine synthetase to give you dihydroxyuric acid. This step gets combined by sulfonamide, and then this step also gets inhibited by another one called trimethoprim, and that is why we use these two drugs in combination to have this sequential block. That maybe only 80% will block, 20% will still form, so this drug will stop and it will stop the synthesis of these nucleic acids, and therefore it will inhibit. Now, the drugs here mentioned are sulfonamides and trimethoprim, which are often sold in a combined formulation, which is called as the Septran or trimethoprim sulfonamide complex. So now I'm going to talk about antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial susceptibility detection. Whatever I've talked about antibiotics till now will also be taught to you in your pharmacology lecture. Now, because we had this delay of your batch starting, your exams getting delayed, the coordination with the pharma department on this topic went a little haywire, but they will cover it up in more detail, and that is why I have only given you a little bit of introduction to these various antibiotics, because it's important to understand how bacterial resistance develops in this. And it was not just, we are encountering antimicrobial resistance now. We have seen this in a lot of things, that it was in his Nobel speech and in his Nobel Prize speech and in his newspaper in 1945 that he cautioned that if you sell these antibiotics, then the organisms which are resistant will go on and penicillin will not be able to work. So the bacteria tend to fight back. How do they fight back? The first and the foremost is that they produce enzymes which break down the antibiotic, which makes it ineffective. So what happens is that for example, there is this E. coli bacteria which creates a beta lactamase, an enzyme which breaks the ring. As I said, that ring, that four square ring has to be there, otherwise it will not fit in that penicillin binding protein. So it degrades that. The other is that they have a very active efflux pump. So the moment the antibiotic goes inside, it pumps it out. So this is seen as an efflux, often seen in gram-negative bacteria, especially Salmonella. Then they can also block the entry. That means that they are changing their site, or they modify the site in such a manner. For example, a certain bacteria called MRSA, it will not allow the bacteria to bind to the penicillin binding protein because it modifies that site where it's going to bind. So in that case, the antibiotic is not able to bind and therefore it's not. Then they modify the metabolic pathway. Like I said, they're synthesizing the pteridine, and then so it bypasses the system and it uses some alternate pathway to produce this. So in that way also the bacterium will be able to give resistance. And this will work in such a manner that it will make the drug quite useless. So they open the ring, this so this is what I was have a gram-positive bacteria. What happens is gram-positive bacteria often develop resistance by changing this site. So if you remember in how glycopeptides work, glycopeptides are vancomycin, teicoplanin. As I told you, they bind to this D-ALA. Now, if somehow the bacteria is able to modify this site, then the organism will not bind. So from D-ALA, it replaces it by D-LAC. And when it does, the vancomycin is not able to bind here, and the cell continues to be synthesized, and therefore resistance develops. Compounds which act by inhibition of protein synthesis, they produce certain modifying enzymes, or they alter their ribosomal binding sites. So that's how it develops. And then these are the ways that it pumps out. Using these outer membrane protein, it can pump out the antibiotics. Similarly, in fluoroquinolone also, either there is a mutation in the entry or there can be a mutation in the efflux pump, which either it is pumped out or it doesn't enter. So any of these can happen. And here is what happens. Now, where does this resistance come from? We've already learned in genetics that sometimes spontaneous mutations can occur which control the susceptibility of the drug. And when that happens, this is called a chromosomal resistance. Then there can be extra chromosomal transferable drug resistance. This we've already covered in your Saturday lecture, transduction, transformations. Any of these is responsible for transferable drug resistance. Now remember, transferable drug resistance is often a short note, very, very commonly asked. And this diagram I'm not going to repeat. I've already spent too much of time last week on this. Then there can be non-genetic forms also. Non-genetic is that because the drug requires metabolically active form, the inactive forms are resistance. So it leads to loss, that the bacteria remain dormant, they will not multiply. So for any antibiotic to act, the bacteria has to multiply, and only those which are in the early log phase or in the log phase are killed. So if they try to remain at that plateau phase of growth curve, then these inactive forms cannot be, because See, what it is acting on? It is acting on either protein or it is acting on the cell wall. अगर बैक्टीरिया मल्टीप्लाई नहीं करेगा तो न तो सेल वॉल बनाएगा न नया प्रोटीन बनाएगा. So those forms will automatically become resistant. So any dormant bacteria which lies intracellularly or walled off is not accessible to action of antibiotics. Then sometimes they lose specific target structure. Like in morphology, I told you that there are cell wall deficit forms. Now these cell wall deficit forms are often resistant to penicillin because there is no cell wall to bind. So there is no target structure for these. And how do they spread? See, imagine a population which has these bacteria. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's take 7, out of which only one harbors the resistance gene. When you give a drug, what happens? All the susceptible ones get killed. And once these susceptible organisms get killed, only one which remains is the drug resistance one. And the resistant one then starts to multiply. And then it throws out resistant genes which can be imbibed by others. So that's how the resistance goes on spreading, and there can be multiple factors for this. There can be host factor, parasite factors, and there can be environment factors. So this is what happens. So we are all nearing, everybody is talking about antimicrobial resistance and post-antibiotic era, and we have to say what is there. Now I'm not going to talk about antibiotic stewardship. Instead, very soon we'll give you a self-directed learning exercise where you have to do your own exercise when it comes to your evaluation. That project will be evaluated and we'll talk about it after some time when we are a little more free with this. What I'm going to talk now is your antimicrobial susceptibility testing is what I will cover now. And antimicrobial stewardship we will cover when we give you the exercise as HDL. Very soon we will give you. And I'm also going to give you a few exercises at the end of the day, which as a group you will do. So when I project them, click a photo of those exercises and discuss amongst your batch whenever you have time. And we will discuss them next week when we have a small group learning for your tutorial for your antimicrobial susceptibility. So much we've talked about antimicrobial resistance. Now we have to know a little bit about how this antimicrobial sensitivity testing is done in our laboratory. In vitro, we mean in our laboratory, how we are going to do it. And there are ways and means to do this antibiotic sensitivity in our. So, what is an antibiotic sensitivity test? It's a laboratory test which determines how effective the antibiotic therapy is going to be against a bacterial infection. And it also tells you that how to control the use of antibiotics. It actually gives an guidance to the clinician which antibiotic to use. So it helps to guide therapy. And if you collect these results over say 1 year or 6 months, it also helps you to guide the empirical therapy. Suppose I make a data, collect this data for my hospital. And so next time when the clinician says that very often we get fever or very often we get pneumonia, so in ICU, which antibiotic should you use? So with the data which has been accumulated, he is able to receive some guidance. Yes, this is the antibiotic that you should use. Then it also helps in assessment of changing trends. कोई नया resistance mechanism तो नहीं आ रहा, कोई नया चीज तो नहीं आ रही, कोई चीज गायब तो नहीं हो रही. Some antibiotics should be stopped using them. So it also helps you in local prescription and identification of pattern. And what do you need? You need standardized methods. नहीं तो क्या होगा? एक इन्फेक्शन को हम कहेंगे रेजिस्टेंस है, लैब 2 कहेगी सेंसिटिव है, lab 3 कहेगी resistance है. So we need a standardized protocol so that all laboratories follow this protocol and interpretive criteria which are clearly defined and documented. and these should be able to generate accurate and reproducible data. So how do you select the test? The test is selected on ease of performance, on flexibility, on adaptability. कॉस्ट बहुत ज्यादा महंगा नहीं होना चाहिए. अगर एक एंटीबायोटिक सेंसिटिविटी करने के लिए 2,000 रुपए लग गए तो मुश्किल हो जाएगी करनी. Reproducibility and reliability. Otherwise, what result I give will be challenged by another laboratory. So the methodology or the test should be in such a manner that the same can be done in another laboratory producing the same result. Then it should be accurate and it should suit the organism and the country. ऐसा नहीं हो कि मैं सेंसिटिविटी दे रही हूँ एंटीबायोटिक की, वो एंटीबायोटिक मेरे कंट्री में अवेलेबल ही नहीं है. And there should be some validation data to assess that. So what are the various methods which are available to us when we are trying to see antimicrobial sensitivity? The most commonly used method is a diffusion method. Now, this is a topic where I like to, do a chalk and talk kind of a teaching, and I like to teach with the help of a chalk and blackboard because it's quite difficult to understand. So, if you don't understand, you're most welcome to, ask questions on this. It's a little tricky thing to understand. So there is a diffusion thing and a dilution thing. So how is diffusion? And then there are a few terminologies which you have to understand. There is a terminology which is called the minimum inhibitory concentration or MIC, which is actually the least amount of antibiotic which is used to inhibit the growth. And bactericidal, the minimum bactericidal concentration is MBC, which is least amount to prevent growth. So it actually measures the amount of antibiotic that is needed to kill. See, the process here is you may require 5 grams to kill a population of antibiotic which is normally there in the blood, but you can't give 5 grams. It's too huge a dose and will kill the person. So the kidney will not be able to excrete out that antibiotic. So in that case, you need to know whether this antibiotic is feasible, at what level is it feasible, and then later on when we are using that antibiotic, we should know that whether this MIC is increasing, that means are the organisms becoming more resistant. So that thing has to be there for resistance and for sensitivity. Now, the dilution methods are often used to determine the MIC. The MIC does not always present an absolute value. It is a true point. Now this is actually not required for an undergraduate level, so I'll just skip this. But you just need to know what are the various dilution methods which are available. One of them is the broth dilution method, which is quite difficult, time consuming. And the other is an agar dilution method where it's easy to do, still technically demanding, but easier when you compare it with the broth. And how do we do it? See, this is where I like to draw and explain. Suppose this is your test sample which contains your bacteria and you need certain media. You've already had your class on media. You need certain media, say Muller-Hinton broth. Muller-Hinton broth and Muller-Hinton agar are the media which are used by microbiologists to test for antimicrobial sensitivity. So we take, say, 25 microliters of the medium in all and we add to these serial dilutions. That means if here I add 25 microliters, this will become 50 microliter. Then I take out 25 microliters from here and I add here. So this already has got 1/2 diluted. If I add to another, then it becomes 1/4. Then if I take out another 25 microliter and add to third, it becomes 1/8. If I continue doing that, I will achieve say 1/128 and the last one I discard. So this is how we make dilutions. So whenever we are talking about making dilutions in microbiology, please remember these are called doubling dilutions because we are doubling the dilution every time we are transferring. So have you understood this part or does anybody have a query related to this? I'll just wait for a few seconds. Understood. Good. Great. Now comes the more complicated part because you've understood the easier part. So you take a tube which has no antibiotic, obviously it will have growth when you incubate it. In the second one, this is a control. So now you've made those dilutions which have doubling dilutions of your antibiotic. So the one which tube now will contain the maximum antibiotic? 1 by 2 या 1 by 128? कौन सी ट्यूब में सबसे ज्यादा एंटीबायोटिक होगी? 1 by 2 में या 1 by 128 में? Anybody? 1 by 2 में, right? Now why 1 by 2 में? Because we keep on diluting. So it is this one which will have maximum and then the antibiotic concentration is going down. So now what we do is that we add the standard amount of bacterial inoculum to each in such a manner that each ml of that solution will contain say 10 to the power 5 organisms only. So we are adding 10 to the power 5 organisms to each of these tubes and we incubate it. The next day you will find that the ones which had the high antibiotic concentration are not showing any growth. But as you go down the concentrations, these growth are occurring. So that means that there is some, development which has happened here. So this is the minimum concentration at which the growth has occurred. Now, all these which are growth has not occurred, I will subculture onto solid media. So I find that even though it is visibly not there, क्या हुआ? So even if I find that visibly it is not there, I will find some growth will occur when I culture it onto plate. So this will be your bactericidal concentration, whereas this should be your minimum inhibitory concentration. So similarly, if I can do this in broth, where instead of so many, but the problem is, suppose I want to do this dilution for 10 strains of bacteria from organism A, B, C. So I will have to put up these many tubes for these many. So that will be a problem. So here, this is the MIC here, this is the MIC. So this is how it will go. So another way of reducing the amount was that I use a microtiter plate. We will show you this microtiter plate in the class and you will see this takes amounts in microliters. So if it takes amounts in microliters, then instead of using the big tubes, I have reduced it. Then this is what I was telling you about, the one which is easier to do, that is an agar dilution. That means because I have a solid surface, I can put up a number of bacterial strain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See here, I can put up to 20. And instead of making a tube with the same principle, I make a plate, a solid plate for each dilution. This is the neat, that means no antibiotic, one neat antibiotic, then 1 by 2, 1 by 4, 1 by 8, 1 by 16, this tarah se. So if you see this, then this is an applicator which is used to apply the sensitivity and this is how the result will look like. You will see that the higher concentration of antibiotic will not give you any growth, but if you go lower to, then you will see these concentration of antibiotics are lower, 0.5, 1, 2 microgram per ml. Here, these organisms are growing. So it's easier to read and a multiple number of them can be done. So media can be tested and the replicator that I showed you, if you use that replicator, then it makes life a little more easier. So, okay, let's move ahead. Disadvantage are again very technically demanding, and once the plates have been prepared, they have to be used early. The endpoints may be difficult. अगर कोई swarm कर गया, फैल गया, कुछ हो गया, incubation में दिक्कत आ गई, and it only gives you MBC read. So ये day to day में possible नहीं है. It's such a complicated thing. इतनी सारी tubes, 100 samples for antibiotic sensitivity, काम करते करते हालत खराब हो जाएगी, है ना? And when you have more workload, then you have chances of error. So scientists designed an easier method to do antibiotic sensitivity, which we do on a day-to-day practice, and that is the diffusion method. Now, diffusion is when you assess the diffusion of antimicrobial agents from disc, tablets, or strip into the solid medium, which has been seeded with the inoculum. And interpretation is based on determining an inhibition size, which is proportional to this. So, this is how it works. Now, let me take a pen. Now, this is your media. This is a plate of nutrient agar in which the bacterial colonies or bacteria has been, put. So, the medium So what happens is that on the media, am I audible? Because I'm getting call from the department. Am I audible and can you see my screen? Okay. So this is the medium that we use, and on that we flood it with on the plate. And then what we do is we put the disc. Now once we put this disc, okay, this contains a set amount of antibiotic. So what happens is the moment you put the disc on a moist plate, the disc tend to diffuse. It will diffuse in the bottom and it will diffuse in all the sides. Imagine it from the top, it's diffusing everywhere, on the side, all along, in all the 3 dimensions. The maximum the drug concentration will be there is below the disc. That's common sense. And as you go on further, this drug concentration will go on decreasing. Right? So suppose this has got say 10 micrograms. Then this site will have little less, will have little less, will have less, and there will be a stage where there will be no antibiotic. So it will come to a stage like this where there will be no antibiotic. कितना diffuse करेगा ना? जितनी आपने डाली है वो सारी तो diffuse हो गई. So once you understand that there is a plate on which this drug has diffused, it's very easy to understand the diffusion methods. So now what you do is that there is this disc and there is the bacteria. So once you have inoculated the culture, you put the bacteria, you put these antibiotic impregnated discs, and then so this is the media, the Muller-Hinton agar plate, and this is the antibiotic impregnated disc. These are basically any filter paper disc which contains set amount of antibiotic. So a 10 microgram disc will contain 10 microgram of antibiotic. A 300 microgram disc will contain 300 microgram of antibiotic. So, and this is the way you make a lawn culture is made. That means the whole plate is flooded with the bacterial solution. And then these discs are applied. And once these discs are applied, then what happens is you will see something like this. Now what is this? As you can see here, there is some discs, where is my pen? Okay, See here, there is no zone. It's only disc. Here there is some zone, here there is a bigger zone, and here there is a huge zone. Now why this is happening is that because the bacteria is there all around. All this is bacteria, the haze that you see. Now when the bacteria grows overnight, it encounters the antibiotic which is diffused from this disc, from this, from this, and wherever it encounters this antibiotic, it is not able to grow. So you will see a zone of inhibition. That means the zone surrounding the disc which doesn't show you any growth is the zone of inhibition. So here also you will see this, and here also you will see this. But the drug which is the organism is completely resistant, like this. You will not see any zone. Why? Because whatever amount of antibiotic you put, if it is not it is not sensitive to it, you will not see any growth, or you will see less growth. So we measure this, and there are two ways to do it. The most common method which is used world over is called the Kirby-Boyer method. And what do you do in Kirby-Boyer? You put 6 of these discs on a plate, and then these zones are then compared with a standardized chart. For example, this is 14 millimeter, this is 38. So suppose there is a bacteria A which is showing 14 millimeter zone with ciprofloxacin and is showing 38 millimeter zone with, say, meropenem. So we will say that we will check with the table. Now the table says that the bacteria X to meropenem is sensitive till 30. So anything above 30, you will label it as sensitive. But anything below 30 or below the range will be resistant. Similarly, if ciprofloxacin is sensitive only if it shows a zone of 20 to 28. So that means if you see a zone which is less than 20, like here it is 14, then it is resistant. So this is how the resistance report is given. The other method which is not commonly used now is the Stokes method, in which you put a test bacterium and the control. Control is a bacteria which is sensitive to all these 6 antibiotics. So what you see here is that there will be a control bacteria which is sensitive to all, and then you will compare the zones from here to here. So if the zone in the test is more than control, or if it is smaller but the difference is not more than 3 millimeter, then we call it sensitive. If the test zone is less than 2 millimeters, then we call it resistant. And the test zone is 2 millimeter, but the difference is also at least 3 millimeter, then we call it intermediate. I know it's a little bit confusing, but when you read this in your book, you will understand it much better. So the advantages are that the control is on the same plate. So if suppose by some mistake the disc is not working, you will be able to detect it, and it's easy to do. In Kirby-Boyer, you put up the controls separately. So if the disc is not working, then you won't come to know. And it's a little difficult standard conditions which are required. And then there are newer methods which have come. There are automated methods and there are molecular methods. In e-test, there is I'll just show it to you how e-test looks like, and maybe then you will understand. It's a commercially available strip which has these graded. Can you see this? The one which we were making in tubes is now available on a graded paper strip. And this paper strip is then put on a plate which contains the growth, and where it cuts, the zone of inhibition is elliptical in shape, and that is why it's called the e-test. The whole thing looks like a E. So that's what you call it, a e-test. So where it cuts, that is your MIC. What are the advantages? The advantages are that it is cost effective, it is easy, and it determines the MIC very well, and it is alright. So now there are a few questions which I want you to understand. If possible, please click a photo with your mobile for this slide. What is the syndrome that the patient is presenting with? What is the predictable bacteria that's causing the syndrome? Which antibiotic will cover this bacteria? And how do I maximize that I am right? And how do I turn away from irrational exuberance? So these are the questions that we are going to answer. Now, this is the first case. I want you to click photos and give. This is for the batch which comes on Monday to microbiology. Alright? The batch which comes on Monday to microbiology. This is the first case. A 12-year-old female presents with sore throat and cough, has some hoarseness, throat pain. What will you prescribe? Group teaching. So, this is case 2 for batch A2 and B2. That means for the batches which come to us on Tuesday. 44-year-old lady, again take a photo, post-op day, undergoing a mitral valve replacement for several mitral regurgitation. Okay? So then case 3. This is for the batch which comes to us on Wednesday. A 63-year-old diabetic male patient admitted with a diabetic foot infection on cephalexin and ciprofloxacin continues to have. So what is the next bed state? Should you give antifungal drugs here? Is there anything that should be done for this patient? Okay. Now you may not be familiar with Candida species, but don't worry, it's a type of yeast-like fungi which causes infection in ICU patients. So we will come to this and we can discuss this later on. Or in my next lecture, I'll give you the answers to this next week whenever I have a lecture. Before that, you must have discussed these 3 with your batch tutorial batch teachers about these. Third batch has also taken the photo. Don't tell me to repeat them. Alright, any questions you have? There was one question. What is meant by doubling dilution? Doubling dilution means that suppose you take X ml of media and you put X ml of, say, the antibiotic in it. So the antibiotic which you put will become X by 2. Now again you take out some amount from there and put it in the other, then it will become X by 4. So doubling dilution is that with every dilution it is doubling. पहले 1 था, फिर half हुआ, फिर 1 by 4 हुआ. That is doubling dilution. Any questions? Anyone else? यार तुम सुनते नहीं हो कि समझ में नहीं आता. Why are we doing dilution? Because we want to see at what dilution, minimum dilution, what is the minimum dilution at which the bacteria is getting inhibited. That is the criteria of why we are doing dilution. So, when we taper it off, say from half, 1 by 4, 1 by 8, 1 by 16, if we get the bacteria get inhibited even at 1 by 16, that we know it's a very sensitive bacteria because even at such a lower concentration, it's got inhibited. But if we are testing only for need, then we never know the minimum amount which is required. So that is the reason why we do minimum inhibitory concentrations. Anyone else? Any questions?